Hey, it's Mr. Drogemeyer again. Thanks for joining me for our Algebra 1 lesson videos, looking at lessons 8 and 9 from Unit 5, called Graphs and Their Intercepts. And so several concepts that we've touched on before, we're going to dig a little deeper with them in this lesson, starting with that concept of a line. When we've been talking about linear functions or linear equations, a line is going to be an infinite set of points extending in two directions. So lines go on forever, um, and we can keep getting closer and closer. We've got infinitely many points that are on that line. And so we've looked at a few different formats of equations of lines. We have slope-intercept, which is our y equals mx plus b. We also have standard form, ax plus by equals c. And then we talked about y-intercepts and x-intercepts. And one thing that we mentioned is that the y-intercept is the value of the function when x equals 0. So if we look at it in terms of a point, x is 0, and then there is a y value. Well, in slope-intercept form, we know that y-intercept right away because it's a part of that format. It's the number that's being added or subtracted after the slope is being multiplied by the x. So b represents that y-intercept. And so in slope-intercept form, the y-intercept is always 0, and then whatever that b value is. So 0 is the x, b is the y. The x-intercept is the value of x when the function equals 0. So when y equals 0, then what is that value for x? Well, if we would solve this equation for x, knowing that y equals 0. So if I plug in 0 for y, because I know that when y is 0, that's my x-intercept point, and now I go to solve this for x, well, I would solve it by subtracting b from each side. That leaves me with mx over here, and on this side, 0 minus b is negative b. I want to solve for x. Right now, x is being multiplied by the slope, so I'm going to divide each side by m, and I get that x equals the opposite of b over m. And so that's where this comes from. So if I know the equation of the line in slope-intercept form, I can find the x-intercept by taking the opposite of the slope, or excuse me, the opposite of the y-intercept and dividing it by the slope. So not something that you necessarily need to memorize, just kind of showing you how you can manipulate these formulas to find some different values. With our standard form, to find the y-intercept, remember we plug in 0 for x, and so if x is 0, that first term zeroes out, and I'm just left with by equals c. Well, if I solve that for y, I would be dividing each side by b, and I get that y equals c over b. So when I have it in standard form, the y-intercept is always going to be the value of the c term divided by the b term. And we'll look at examples with numbers here, just kind of looking at it conceptually right now. The x-intercept, we would plug in 0 for our y. So we have ax. We would plug in 0 for y, which would zero out that y term, and we get ax equals c. Divide each side by a to solve it for x. So x equals c of a. So that's where these values that we have showing here came from. Let's look at how those work in practice. So if I wanted to find the x and y intercepts of this equation, y equals negative 2/3 minus 6. Well, we know that that's in slope-intercept form. And so that means that our y-intercept is negative 6. Y-intercept has an x value of 0, and then the y value of -6. So that's our y-intercept. Our x-intercept is going to have a y value of 0. And this is where we said if it's in slope-intercept form, we can take the opposite of that y-intercept. So the opposite of -6 would be +6. And then we would divide it by the slope. Well, this is a little bit more difficult. We're taking 6 and we're dividing it by -2/3. Well, if you remember, dividing by a fraction is the same as multiplying by its reciprocal. And so reciprocal means we're flipping that fraction. So 6 divided by -2/3 would be the same as 6 times -3/2. Multiplying across to multiply fractions, 6 times -3 is -18 over 2. And if we simplify that fraction, that would simplify to -9. So our x-intercept would be -9. Once I have those, then I could plot them on the graph and then just draw the line between them. So I'm not showing the graphs on this one, but we could plot those 2 points, draw the line, and that should give us the line that matches that equation. All right, let's do the same thing with our second example here. This one is in standard form. We have 5x minus 2y equals 8. Want to find our x and y intercepts. Well, we said, again, y-intercept has an x value of 0. Our y value is going to be found by taking c divided by b. Well, our c term is 8. Our b term is -2. So 8 divided by -2 is -4. So that should be our y-intercept. Our x-intercept is going to have a y value of 0. The x value is going to be c divided by a. Our c term again is 8. Our a term is 5. 8 divided by 5. I'm going to leave it in that improper fraction form. It would be 8/5, or we could simplify it to 1 3/5. We could also think of that in decimal form. It would be 1.6. Either of those or any of those are fine, but that would be my y and x intercepts. So I could plot those 2 points on the graph, draw the line in between. All right, and that's all I've got for you today. I appreciate you taking the time to watch. As always, if you have questions, please let me know. Thanks. Have a great day.